Good afternoon, evening, whatever you want to call it, people. Let's get this video started with central conics. Now, central conics are just a conic with a center. So there are some conics that, when we're talking about that, we're not talking about a parabola. The ones that we are talking about are circles, ellipses, and hyperbolas. Those all have centers. A parabola does not. It has a vertex. All right, so then from here, the reason why we're talking about this is remember how we had all those conics with the center being 0, 0. Well, now let's talk about if, in fact, the center is not the origin as we go along. Ellipses with center HK instead of just 0, 0. If you're talking about just those ellipses, let's talk about the ones with the horizontal major axis. So for the most part, an ellipse that looks like that. The equation is just going to be x minus h squared over a squared, y minus k squared over b squared equals 1. Now, remember when this was just x squared. The reason why is that because that and that was just 0. If in fact those are 0, that would be x squared and that would be y squared. But that's one thing that's what we used to do. It's not what we do anymore. Now with the foci, this is how you find the foci, and that's what happens with c squared. That's how you find the distance. So we know a lot of this stuff already, but the only difference is that instead of just plain old x squared and y squared, we have x minus h squared and y minus k squared. Now remember that the center is represented by hk. For hyperbolas, nothing really changes, just instead of x squared you have x minus h, instead of y squared you have y minus k. Everything, all the other rules are just the same. That's how you find the foci based off of that. And this is how you do it for a vertical major axis. So nothing really changes from how we used to do ellipses and how we used to do hyperbolas. Let's actually do some problems so that you can see. Find an equation of the ellipse having foci negative 3, 4 and 9, 4. And sum of focal radii is 14. Now, the best thing to do is, before you do anything, is draw a picture just to see where the focal radii are. If you're in negative 3, 4, you're somewhere in the second quadrant. If you're 9, 4, you're somewhere in the first quadrant. So basically, since my y terms, my y coordinates are the same, this is going to be a horizontal ellipse. So it's going to be an ellipse that looks like that. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. It's going to look something like that. So now we know that. Also, another thing we know is the sum of the focal radii is 14. So let's use all of that information. So since that's the case, sum of focal radii is 2a. So if that's the case, a equals 7. Then to find the center, that's just halfway in between your foci. So that's one foci, that's another foci. Halfway in between is just halfway in between 9 and negative 3. And that just so happens to be 3. Notice the 4 doesn't change, because when you're on the same level, it just doesn't change. So that's what the center is going to be. Now, if we know the center, we can find out what C is, because the distance from the center to each focus, in this case, is going to be 6, right? To get from negative 3 to 3 is 6, to get from 3 to 9 is 6. So since that's the case, the distance from the center to the focus is represented by the letter C, so C is equal to 6. After that, we can find out what B squared is. We can find out what B is. By doing B squared equals A squared minus C squared. If we do that, then we know, since A is equal to 7 and C equals 6, 49 minus 36 is going to give us 13, which is B squared. So that means B equals the square root of 13. So we got that part. Now, from here, we can actually come up with the equation. Why? Because from the center, we know what H is. We know what K is. We know what A squared is. We know what B squared is. So if that's the case, we have everything we need to plug that into our equation. The reason why we know this is the one we're using is because, remember, we have a horizontal major axis. So our ellipse goes horizontal. Since it goes horizontal, That means that the equation I'm using is x minus h squared over a squared plus y minus k squared over b squared equals 1. That's the one that I'm using. So that's how we find that. Let's talk about with a hyperbola. If a hyperbola has an equation that with the foci being -3, -2, and -3, 8, and the difference of the focal radii is 8. Now remember, things don't really change here. The difference is still represented by 2a. So with that, we know that a is equal to 4, since the difference in focal radii is 8. After you know that part, once again, the center is halfway in between the foci. If this is your foci and this is your foci, notice my x term this time doesn't change. So this gives you an idea of what the hyperbola is going to look like. If my x term doesn't change, let's find out where these things are. If we go -3, -2, that's going to be in the third quadrant somewhere. And if we go -3, 8, that's going to be in the second quadrant. So as you can see with this hyperbola, if those are our foci, then that means that our hyperbola is going to go like that. It's going to be a vertical. Major axis is going to be vertical. So the center is just halfway in between. So you're looking for what's halfway in between here and here, since the x coordinates don't change. So halfway in between those two right there, halfway in between those two, -2 and 8, you'll see is 3. So that means our center is going to be -3, 3. The distance from the center to each focus is 5. If you notice, -3 doesn't change, but to get from 3 to 8 is 5. From 3 to -2 is also 5. So we got that part. After that, we know C. So now that we know A and now we know C, we can find out what B is. Because B squared is, in this case, since it's a hyperbola, it's C squared minus A squared. From there, you get 25 minus 16, which is 9. So if B squared is equal to 9, that means B equals 9. This is not really important information. B is equal to 3. So we can actually generate our parabola. Now, since we're dealing with a vertical hyperbola, did I say parabola last time? I'm sorry. Since it's vertical, then the actual thing that we're dealing with, the y term comes first. So you're dealing with y minus k squared over a squared minus x minus h squared over b squared equals 1. That's the one we're dealing with. So since that's the case, we know where everything's going to go. We know what a is, we know what a squared is, we know what b squared is, and we also know what hk is, which is right here. So what we end up getting, that's basically what I just explained. The y squared term is positive because the foci are vertical. Since we have all that, we get this equation. And that's how you find those. So we have, I have this one. Why don't you guys go ahead and give that one a shot. Pause the video, give that one a shot, and then compare your answer to mine. Go ahead and pause the video now. This is what you should have gotten. I already know the sum of the focal radii, so that means that A is going to be 3. That's where I get A equals 3 from. I get the center because I drew a little diagram up here, so this is going to be dead smack in the middle of those. That's where the center is going to be dead smack in the middle. I just took the midpoint between 2, -3, and 2, 1. So from there, I was able to find the center. Now the distance from the center to one of the foci is just 2. So that means C equals 2. Once I have C, I can find out what B squared is. And then after that, this, remember, this gets the bigger one because our ellipse is going to be vertical. So the y term gets the larger denominator. So that's how I came up with this equation. So there's one that we can do. Try this one. Pause the video again. Try that one and then come back and compare your answer to mine. So pause it right now. You should get something that looks like this. The reason why is your focal radii. I found A by doing 2A equals 4, so A equals 2. After that, I found my center, which is halfway in between this point and this point. So really, forget the 5. If I look at -6 and 2, what's halfway in between those? -2. So I put that, and then from there, the distance from the center to the focus, to any of the focuses or foci, is 4. So that means C equals 4. So then once I have A, once I have C, I can find out what B is, or B squared, because B squared equals C squared minus A squared. Since it's a hyperbola, it's C squared minus A squared, which is 16 minus 4. It gives you 12. So from here, notice that my foci are horizontal from each other. So since they're horizontal from each other, then the x term comes first. So the x term is going to be x plus 2 squared over a squared, which is 4, and then y minus 5 squared over 12, or b squared, which is 12. And you should come up with this. All right, moving on. One last part, hopefully we can get through a little bit of this. Identify the conic, x squared minus 4y squared minus 2x minus 16y minus 11 equals 0. Find its center and foci, then draw the graph. Basically, you're going to be given an equation like this, and you're going to have to identify whether it's a circle, whether it's an ellipse, or whether it's a hyperbola. This is how you actually do it. From here, looking at this, to make this simpler, you would have to complete 2 squares. So you have to complete this square and this square. But the thing is, something's stopping this one from being completed. This -4, because that should be all by itself. Oh, actually, there should be a square right here. This -4 right here is stopping that from being a complete square. So what we're going to do is factor out the 4, and we should end up with something that looks like this. Once we end up with something that looks like this, we can start completing the square. From here, if you divide b by 2 and square it, this is going to be a 1. Divide by 2, square it, this is going to be a 4. Now, when we get over here, we're going to add 1, but here we're not going to add 4. We're adding -16, because whatever we're adding from here has to be multiplied by the -4. So we should end up that way. And once we end up with that, let's just start simplifying things. And you should end up with x minus 1 squared, and -4 times y plus 2 squared equals -4. So if we divide both sides by -4, this is what's going to tell us what kind of conic this is. You get something like look like this. And if in fact you get this, looking at it, since you have a minus sign right here, this is obviously a hyperbola. And then from there, if in fact we graph it, we know how to graph these now. Get no man's land, get the asymptotes. After you get the asymptotes, pick your points, and you get the curve. So we'll do that. I won't make you go through a third example. This is basically what we're going to be doing in class. I hope that you learned something from this video, and I will see you later.